Hey guys, it's Kate, and I had a couple of questions about watercolor tubes versus pans, and they are questions I had when I first started, so I thought that I would make a video and go over some of the things that I've learned, which I'm sure is not covering everything, but should give you a good idea of what you want to do when you're starting out with watercolor. And even if you've been doing it a little while, maybe some things you hadn't thought of that might help you make your decision. So first, let's talk about consistency. So when you have your watercolor tubes, and it will vary by brand, some will be a little bit more liquidy than others, but I squeezed out just a dollop of this Marie's Masters watercolor. And as you can see, and this is lamp black by the way, it kind of has a consistency of a medium body acrylic paint almost. It's kind of like toothpaste, and you can see the blob there in the pan. And then, you know, obviously, but maybe not so obviously, you've got your cured, dry, and hard pans in your watercolor palette. So this is my Mozart Kohlrabi palette, which I was just trying to open on the wrong side. And these pans are completely dry to the touch. Now, this specific brand has kind of a glossy look to it, so it almost looks wet on camera, but as you can see, it is dry to the touch. There's no moisture here. And these pans are very reasonable and good quality. I mean, I own them, I use them in several videos, and those are full pans. Now, these are Mei Liang, and they also come in a set. I believe it's 48 colors, and these are half pans. They're a little bit smaller. And just FYI, a full pan will hold about 5 milliliters of paint. These will hold about half that. And my tubes, you can get ranges, but most of mine are between 8 and 10 milliliters. So one of these tubes would fill about 2 full pans or maybe 4 half pans. Now with watercolor pans, you can get these pre-made sets. You can also get tubes and pour your own pans. And that's actually what I did here with one of my first palettes that I made from tubes. I bought this empty palette on Amazon, and I used Royal Langnickel Essentials paints. Now you can see the finish here is much different than these Mozart Kohlrabis or the Mei Liang, and they're very hard and brittle. They've been in here for several years. They will still re-wet and paint no problem. I actually just pulled them out and used them in a recent video of mine. Now the paint is lower quality than either of these two and pretty much anything I have now. But for a beginner, I enjoyed the heck out of these, and you can see I used up quite a few colors, and I've refilled this several times too. And so when you get these larger sets with 40 colors or 36 colors, it's really nice to have, especially starting out, because it's a low price point to get a lot of different colors to play with. That said, once you get going, you're going to develop your favorite colors. And like in this palette, which I haven't had for all that long, I have used a ton of the Payne's Gray, Turquoise, and Yellow Ochre. And so this is starting to get kind of low, and once it's gone, I can't go buy a replacement color for this in this brand. I can go buy Yellow Ochre, but I can't buy Mozart Kohlrabi Yellow Ochre. I have to buy a whole new palette if I want that same color back again. Same thing with this. Now, I did see that the Mei Liang brand sells tubes now, but it's the same thing. You have to buy the whole set of tubes. You can't just get a single color. And if you never use this orange right here, it turns into a little bit of a waste long term, because you're just going to keep collecting those and you're never going to be going through the pans. Now, say you've taken up watercolor and you have fallen in love with it, and you're kind of thinking long term, well, if I'm going to be running out of colors, if I really love watercolor and I want to start thinking more about something a little bit better, a little higher up, one thing to consider is whether you can get those single colors again. So in this Cotman Field set, Winsor & Newton, I can get, if I run out of this white, for instance, I can buy a brand new pan of this, and it's, I think, you know, a couple of dollars, a few dollars, and I can just get the one pan. Also, I can get tubes, and this is also a Cotman color. And so in this set, I have 14 colors. This is actually Payne's Gray, which I love, and it does not come with this set here. And actually, you can see I have some sitting in my mixing well up here. So I have squirted this out. Right now, this is dry to the touch and cured on my palette, but it will re-wet just like these the same way. I also have this Grumbacher Academy watercolor here. These are good student grade. And then I just actually got these Marie's Masters. And I actually bought a new palette that I filled. So a few weeks ago, I got the Marie's Masters 12 color set just to try. And this is artist grade watercolor, and it came with a set of 12 tubes, and they are 9 milliliters each. And so I've got a set with full pans, and you can see I did sort of an unboxing and swatching, and I have since filled in more colors, but these here are the original 12. And so I squirted this right out from the tubes into my palette, and these are dry to the touch and cured. I let them sit in here for a couple of weeks, and I actually just found that they went on sale, and I liked them so much I bought extra single colors to fill out some more of my palette, and that's where some of these came from. So I got raw sienna right here, which is this color. That is yellow ochre, which has a little bit of green in it, but that'll be fine. It'll come off. So the raw sienna, I actually just filled these up, and they are starting to dry. So I grabbed a toothpick, and you can see it's still very creamy. And I'm just letting this harden up and finish drying so that I can use it just like I would any other palette that I have. And just to give you an idea, I'm just going to rub this right on here. And you can see how pigmented these colors are. Now this is going to be the first time I've actually ever used this color. But let me grab my brush and get it wet. And you can see how lovely that looks. See? And so it works beautifully. Now I can kind of clean up this yellow ochre a bit with my wet brush and get some of that green off of there, because sometimes I'll dip when I'm color mixing. And this is that dried cured color, and you can see that re-wets really nicely too. And they both look wonderful on the paper. Okay, I'm back and ready to do some tests. So to my left, I have my Marie's Masters. These right now are dry to the touch. I have the alizarin crimson here and lamp black back here, and I took out those tubes so I can work with them today, and I've already got some lamp black in here. It is still wet. I am going to squirt out some alizarin crimson and get started with this. The other one, now these ones I squirted from these tubes, so you're going to see the difference between the pan color and the wet tube color straight out from the tube. The other one is my Cotman set. So this is the burnt umber right here, and this was actually manufactured as the pan. I also have an extra tube of burnt umber, and you can see the difference between tube and it came as a pan. I've got a blotting paper towel over here, and I'm going to start with the Marie. So I've got my black in there, and I'm going to put my alizarin crimson in there too, if I can get the lid off. Okay, I got the lid. Okay, now I'm going to squirt just a dab out, and as you can see, it's kind of like toothpaste, and it's wet, just like this black. So first, I'm going to take my round brush, it's a smaller round, and I'm going to activate my black and my crimson, just like that. And so I'm going to go right in here, get a pretty good load on my brush. I'm going into a dry piece of paper, and I'm going to come across. And that's nice and rich. Now I'm going to go into my black and do the same. And I really love this watercolor. I've just started using it. I have my sort of unboxing video that just went up. So those are from the pan. Now I'm going to show you what it's like from the tube. Now you can add as much or as little water to this as you want. I'm going to add 1 brush load of water here and go in and mix up some color. And you can see it pretty much looks the same. I actually have a little bit of extra water on my brush. I'm going to blot that. And I'm going to try it a little bit more concentrated. And you see how you can really vary the concentration. Now what I can also do is grab some of this thick paint, if I can get it to focus. I can grab some of this thick paint and really put it on there. And here, you can even get some of that nice texture. And you can see the brush lines on this a little bit more. Now I have a bristle brush right here, and I'm going to dab that into some of this paint too. And you can get some pretty interesting brush strokes. Now, if I do that with the pan, I can get a bit of a similar brush stroke, but you can see it's a little bit more filled in because I don't just have the creamy paint on there. I've got some water too. And even if I dip back in, which I have blotted my brush pretty well, I still get some of that paint in there. Another thing I can do is go in with a much larger brush like this and really get in here in that paint. Let me grab this paper here and come right across with a light wash. I'm kind of out of paint there, so but you can see that really nice even coat where I can't even get this brush into the pan. So that is another thing. Now to remedy that, you could still use pan paint. You just have to get something with more of a well, and they have those giant palettes you can get for just that purpose. Now I'm going to play around with the black a little bit because I haven't done anything with that yet. And so let me go in here with some water on my brush, and it mixes up really nicely. And you can see that rich color. Now it looks darker, and I mean, really the reason is you tend to grab more paint. I had a pretty good sized blob in here and it's already gone. Now, to be fair, I did use extra paint here and really globbed it on. So if paint conservation is a concern, then that's something to think about, because you can use this full strength, which I'm doing right now, and that is a very dark color. So using the tube will use more paint, but it also gives you a lot more freedom if you want to have different effects. I'm gonna put this aside and grab a fresh sheet of paper. So I've got this little sponge here. I'm just gonna get a little bit of moisture on it, just like that, and dip this right into my paint. And see that? Now, if I do that with this dried a little bit, so, and my spray bottle doesn't want to squirt. Let's try this. Okay. Let me go to a different part. I'm going to dip with a clean part of my sponge. I can do some sponging here too. Now I will leave a little bit of texture in my pan, which if you don't mind that, it's not a big deal, but you can do sponge effect. It's a little bit darker and more pronounced here than it is here, and that's really just because you're dealing with mostly cured paint. Another thing I can do that I wouldn't do with my pans because it's a palette knife is paint with a palette knife. And so I can scoop some right out of here. And go right down just like this. And I can even make this a little bit abstract and have that spread. See that? And activate it a little bit more. And you can get some really neat effects. And you still get that very, very dark area here. Now, if I did the same thing with black from my pan, and I have this really nice dark blob, and I spray that, I think it might disperse more. Actually, this is a pretty cool looking paper. I like it. And I'm just kind of letting this flow around. All right, I'm going to set that aside and go to some of these Cotman colors. So for this one, I'm going to kind of show some of the difference between the burnt umbers. So this is a different brand, different type of paint. Well, same watercolor, but this has a really similar consistency. You can see that in the little well. And I'm going to give my palette a spray to activate the burnt umber. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start here with the paint from the tube. And you can see the finish there. Looks really nice. I can also make it more concentrated, where you start to get some of that texture. Now, let me go in with my brush. And you can see same color. Let me do one dip that time. Now, I can still go in straight from the tube and get that very thick color. Almost like a very opaque acrylic paint. You can kind of see the varying degrees of thickness there. Okay, I'm back and we're mostly dry, so I just want to show you everything. And by mostly dry, I mean 99%. There's a couple little paint blobs right here that still have a very, very slight moisture just because it was thick on there. But we are dry for the purposes of what we need here. And so I just wanted to show you some close-ups. This is, I believe, Indian Red from the Marie's Watercolors. This was that fresh tube that I went into with the toothpick that was over here in the pan, but I just put it in there last night. And this is yellow ochre mixed with a little bit of green that I had from the cured side that I actually used the other day. So you can see here where they dried, both of them go on very rich. They both have wonderful pigment. You can see there's a little more texture here. And I think for me, that is one of the biggest differences with the tube paint versus pan paint. Because of the way the pans are activated and you can only get a layer of paint at a time, you can go in with strong color, but you can't go in with the super thick color like you can with the tube paint. And you can see where I had kind of rolled the toothpick down here. You can still see some of that texture even though I sprayed it and went over it with a brush. This is that really nice wash stroke that I made with my thick brush here. And this is just another thing that you can use your tube paint for, or if you're using pans, you can get a custom palette with deeper wells, which you would squirt tube paint in and let it cure, or use just as you go. And you can get a nice even wash. Now, you can't use a giant brush like that in these types of pans. So if you're working larger scale, you definitely will want to go with a large palette or tube paint into some sort of container or plate. Now this just compares some of those strokes. So both of these are Marie's. This was the Marie's from the cured pan. And these three were varying levels of concentration from the tube. And you can see you can get just about the same from both pan or tube. But with the tube, you can also get that very thick lay-on of paint where you can see the brush strokes and everything still. You can even see it kind of sitting on the page where it's dried. And it is dry. I'm not getting any off. Same thing with the black here. The top is from the pan. These are both tube strokes, and you can get very thick here with that black. Here's some dry brushing from the tube, and then this is all from the pan. Now, when I did the palette knife and the sponge, so this is the sponge from the pan, this is the sponge from the tube. But one of the biggest differences I wanted to show you, and again, it just has to do with the thickness of the paint that's on the page. And this is where I painted with the palette knife, and I had full strength tube paint on here, and then I sprayed it with some pretty generous water. Now, This, I painted a pretty thick blob from the pan with my brush, and both of them you'll see had dispersion in the color, but this one is a much softer look to it, and it's, I think, because of the moisture and the thinner paint that we started with, even though it was also very opaque and on there liberally. But this maintained a lot more of that original shape from the palette knife, which, depending on what you're doing, you might really enjoy having some of that texture in your artwork. Now, with the Maries, all of these originally came from tubes. The pan paint was a tube paint that I had dried and cured, and you can see the difference here. Now, with the Winsor and Newton Cotman colors, I had the burnt umber and I had the factory pan, but also a tube, so I could show you the similarities and differences there too. And like you can see here, when you're using it at just sort of regular strength, the pan and the tube are pretty much identical. It's really when you want those thicker applications, the tube comes out ahead. There's no wrong answer here, and you can mix and match. And for me personally, I like the best of both worlds. I can do any of these effects because I go for the tube and I have a custom palette exactly the way I like it. And so the further on I go, the more I gravitate toward a setup kind of like this, where I can use tube if I want to, and I can dip into my palette with the cured pan and do the exact same thing, or use the exact same color. So it really just comes down to what paint preferences you have. And for a lot of these brands that you can get single colors, you can get a pan or a tube. And I believe you can even get a pan set in Marie's, but I have not tried that, so I won't talk about that here because I don't know that much about them. You might develop a preference with certain colors in specific brands. And so one of the nice things about building your own palette, whether you're doing tubes or pans, is you can really play around with just coming up with something that you really love. And one example of that here actually is I have been wanting to get a titanium buff color, and actually I can't get it in Marie's. So this palette is, pretty much all Marie's except for this pan here. I just put in this Van Gogh titanium buff, and I bought this to try. I added it to this palette because it's just a single tube color that I have, and I'll be able to kind of play around with it. If I decide I hate it, I can just pop this pan right out of here and replace it with another full pan, and I can switch around my palette, rearrange it, whatever I want to do. So hopefully that gave you some idea of your options, but really it's whatever you prefer, whatever is best for you, what is most affordable, and just being able to play around and have fun and develop these preferences. But until next time, keep creating.